Does C2 Arlecchino actually change any rotations? Yeah. So the main thing that the C2 does is it gives you one more pyro up, which actually prevents you from doing the default rotations if barely have the application you need. In other words, specifically in melt teams, your rotations need to be different from because of C2. If you're doing the same rotations in melt teams as you do at C0, your C2 will melt, but then your normal attack that follows the C2 proc will apply pyro before you get cryo back on the enemy. And you'll lose all your melts on the rest of your rotation. Even if you dodge, yeah. Because the C2 hit happens like almost a full second after the charge attack input. In other words, the C2, right, if you're doing a charge attack, a dash, and a normal attack, like this, the C2 hits around the same time as the N1 hits. And because you have two applications in very quick succession, you don't get cryo in between the two, so you'll end up with a pyro aura on the enemy. What that means is that if you don't want to change your rotations, and all you want to do is change the combo on Arlecchino, at C2, what you need to do is this. Yeah. Which looks a little dumb, but it is what it is. Or you can do the dash cancel if you want, but with your default setups, you get a cryo application between the charge attack hit and the normal attack. I guess it depends on who you're using, actually. So with some characters, you don't. Like with Shilonen, you don't. But with Kazuha and Sucrose, you do. In single target. As long as you're doing 2Es on Sucrose. And like, if you're doing C2 Arlecchino, you should be using Sucrose. Bucko. Right? You get the cryo application right after the charge attack hit, and that's the cryo application you need to melt the C2 proc. But effectively, that cryo application. Alright, let me open Paint. Alright, let me draw a timeline of application. Actually. Where did that come from? So, Arlecchino, E, Bennett, EQ, Sucrose, EE, Seatlali, EQ, and then, oops, fuck. And then Arlecchino uptime, right? And if you look at when your applications happen, you've got Arlecchino double hit from skill, right? Because the skill hits twice. Then you have Bennett 2U from the E into 2U from the Q. Then you swap into Sucrose. You get your first swirl. That reduces that 2U to 1.5. Well, technically that 2U is 1.6, and it decays a little. So it basically goes to like a 1-ish from the first E, 0.5-ish from the second E. Then here, Seatlali melts, removes the aura. You now have no aura on the enemy. And then her burst initial hit happens around here, because it's a long animation. Now from the burst initial hit, after that, it activates her off field. So her off field starts ticking every second, or every 2 seconds. Well, it ticks every second, it applies cryo every 2 seconds. So there's one here. Then 2 seconds later, there's another one. Then 2 seconds later, there's another one, etc. etc. And without C2 on Arlecchino, okay. And then there's also the Spirit Skull Vessel Explosion, right? The second hit of her burst. That happens here. Right? By default, Arlecchino's Arlecchino's app without C2, right? The charge attack would hit here. So if you're using Sucrose, or you're using Burst on Chilonen, or you're using Kazuha, basically, if you weaken the Pyro from Bennett enough by the time you swap to Citlali, that the skill wipes the aura and the Burst applies a Cryo Aura instead of melting, you don't have to dash cancel the charge attack. Otherwise, you have to dash cancel it. But either way, the charge attack hits here. It's more like here, actually. Right here. Right? And then the first off-field tick happens. And then your normal attack hits here. But if you have C2, that C2 also happens here. So you only melt one of C2 and normal attack. And the other one applies Pyro, and then Citlali doesn't have enough Cryo application to wipe that Pyro Aura and get a Cryo Aura back. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to swap out to Sucrose or Citlali to weaken the Pyro Aura, so that you can swap back to Arlecchino with a Cryo Aura on the enemy. And by default, Arlecchino's attacks, technically, it actually happens, like, here and here. And it happens, the next one is, like, here. My lines aren't exactly perfectly lined up, but it's close enough, I suppose. Right? And this is how your applications line up. It means that without the C2, right? This applies Cryo Aura. Right? Apply Cryo, melt. 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 Right? Even though Arlecchino applies Pyro faster than Citlali applies Cryo, because starting, right, her app every 2 seconds starts here for Citlali, Arlecchino triggers her first reaction right before that starts. Which means that even though it's faster because it starts with a delay right before an application, it takes a while for that application to happen, for 2 applications to happen in between 2 Citlali skills, right? But with the C2, you start with a Pyro Aura because of this additional hit, so you're doomed. In other words, with the C2, what you have to do is you have to fucking remove this altogether. This attack, this normal attack, gets replaced by the C2 proc, and you wait until this to start attacking. Which means that the rotation in practice looks really stupid. Right? Because you do your whole setup, you swap to Arlecchino, you do your charge attack, you wait for like a second and a half, and then you start attacking. Does this gonna be apply 1U or 2U? From what I understand, her skill is 1U, her burst is 2U. So her burst will be useful for setups. That need to wipe a Pyro Aura. Anyways, your other option is to do things in a very scuffed rotation way. And that, it's the way I think is the funniest, but yeah. Anyways, so your other option is to do this. Wait, what? Did I fuck up? What did I fuck up? Something went wrong. What went wrong there? Something was deeply wrong there. I think I got the fucking off-field mark application. Show no mercy. Oh, yeah, so you do this. I guess. Light it up. Can you get the prompt, please? Here we go. I'll do the I won't dash cancel my charge attack so I can simulate what the application looks like if you do dash cancel your charge attack with C1. But yeah, this is my favorite way of doing the Arlecchino C2 rotation. Oops. I fucked it up. I shouldn't have dash cancelled. Let me try to do it properly again. Yeah, it's the one that does 2 swaps into Arlecchino, I think is fucking hilarious. Oh, I don't have burst. We don't talk about that. But yeah, this is the one that I think is a lot funnier. Does not fuck TDDS. You don't lose TDDS when you swap out. But you will lose TDDS after like 4 and 3s instead of like 5. But it's not the end of the world. Because especially at C1 or at C2, your damage is like so much more front loaded, especially in a melt team. Right? Like if you look at the total output from melt Arlecchino at C0, right?
Good things come to those who don't wait around.
This
Anyway.
true, false, false.
Probably true for me.
Repeat. Oops. Oh. And then EM multiplier. Let's say she has 100. She has 80 EM. 80 EM is very. Well, let's say 100 actually. Actually, no, because you'd do sucrose, right? So you'd have like 300. Okay, yeah. And we don't look at Sig.
No one's joined me on an adventure in ages.
Right.
Come on, let's go.
Alright. And then the adjusted motion value times 1 plus if this. Actually, no. If this, then it's times 2 times this. Otherwise, it's times 1. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, your adjusted motion value, once you account for melt, in a team with sucrose, is this. I guess I should just have it like this. Yeah. Right. And then we will have this 1, this plus this. Yo. And then if I do this and put this into a graph, I guess I need to add a 0. But it doesn't look too bad. Right? This is how your damage goes over time. Right? But as you can see, after half of your attacks, you've done like 2/3 of your damage. I guess instead of the axis being that, I could change it and have it be equal to this divided by this. And have that as the y-axis. because it'll be a lot easier to internalize this way. And then we'll make sure that our axis options cap out at 100, maximum 1. And then the x-axis option caps out at 18. So, as you can see, right, after about half of your attacks, you've done almost 2/3 of your damage, right? This is the default C0 stuff. But how does this chart change with constellations? So C1 changes this number, adds 100 to it. You do 1.2 plus 100. 100%. All right. So just the C1. If I copy this, select data, change this from 1 to 19 to 23 to 40. 23, 40, 23, 40. Oh. It should have been 22, 40. Oops. Select data. 22. 22. So, alright. It goes up a little faster. And at that same midpoint, we're at 62 instead of 60. One attack later, I guess that 10 attacks, 70.1 instead of 69. I guess it's not that big of a difference. The biggest difference is the C2. So let's add the C2 now. Oh. Change this to 45. Oops, 45. And then change this to 62. Oh. And then all we have to do is add the C2 proc. Which is 900 motion value. And it starts at 45. Wait, am I an idiot? Am I stupid? Alright, there we go. This makes a lot more sense. There we go. And we can now graph this. I guess. Ah! Select data. Oh. And it's what? 45, 63? 45, 63. 45, 63. And as you can see, because of that C1 proc effectively bumping a lot of your motion value at the very start of the rotation, instead of reaching the 50% damage mark at the 7th attack at C1, and around the 7th at C0 as well, you now reach this 50% on the 4th attack. In other words, you get punished less for lower buff uptime in a team like that, because so much of your damage is happening at the start of your rotation, because the C2 proc is a massive fucking nuke.